Today's sponsor is the LitWorld app. It's an app that helps students in grades 6 through 12 engage with reading, as books are literally broken into text message-sized chunks, making reading easier. Stay tuned at the end of the show to learn how to get a free educator account by LitWorld in your classroom.
Welcome to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast, hosted by author, educator, speaker, and mom, the Cool Cat teacher, Vicki Davis.
So today we're talking about a very important topic. Pam Allyn is a renowned author, speaker, and social impact creator and the founder of Dewey, a family learning initiative, and LitWorld, a global literacy organization reaching children in 26 countries. She is the author of Every Child a Super Reader. And also, the previous podcast that I used to have, Pam, you were one of my top shows. So thanks for coming on the 10-Minute Teacher.
Happy to be here. I'm glad we could be here right at this very pivotal time.
So Pam, as we dive in, we have students, and we're really kind of targeting grades 6 through 12, students who are developing readers or struggling readers, depending on what you call them. And some kids may not have even picked up a book for the last year and a half. And they're going into grades 6 through 12. They have a lot of content. They have textbooks. And where do you suggest that teachers start when that student comes in and they go, oh my goodness, I realize that they're really struggling or trying to access this text and it's a struggle for them. So how do you advise teachers?
Well, I think the first thing is that we are all coming back into this with some anxiety, and that our first instinct as teachers, especially middle and high school students, is that we tend to look at what they can't do before we look at what they can do. It's just our instinct, and it's because it's coming from a really good place. Everyone who's listening today are generously spirited, mission-driven people, and we want the best for our kids. My first area of recommendation is really to say that I want you to take a deep breath and really focus on the strengths of your young people. Your instinct is going to be to look to see what the deficits are. And of course, we can do that in our faculty meetings and sort of sift through all the assessment materials. But in the classroom, side by side with our students and in interacting with them from home to school, as teachers and parents and caregivers, is to focus on their strengths, to say, I am so proud of you for what we've all been through and the journey that we've all taken, and we're back together and we're going to create an environment of belonging here. No matter what, where, or how we're reading right now, we're all accepted and we're all safe here and we're all feeling a sense of togetherness. And those aren't, like idle words. Those aren't soft words. Those are really important words that I've seen in my work, in the research, and in my practice, that when I set the stage in classrooms for communities of belonging, my students feel strong, they feel ready, they feel seen, and they feel heard. So that's number one. And also that's amplifying their resilience, that they may not have been doing the conventional kinds of reading or the traditional ways we think about reading this year, but I can guarantee you that actually a lot of other kinds of reading they were doing this year is going to have a big impact on them. So one of the first things I'm inviting teachers to do is to have open, honest conversations, as I just recently did with a class of 7th graders, where they were saying how all the texting back and forth that they did on social media with their friends actually really gave them a sense of still feeling part of a social community, even when they were isolated. So I thought that was really interesting. And I want to amplify that with my students to say, reading is everywhere. Reading is on the text message. Reading is on the comic book. Reading is on the back of the cereal box. What kind of reading did you do this year? And actually celebrate that. The second thing is what you were saying, which is the technical hard part of they're going to have to read their social studies textbooks. They're going to have to do a science lab. They're going to have to read the novel that's been assigned for the whole 9th grade group. All of those things that we're worried about as teachers. And one thing I can say about that is that for us to be really intentional, to find colleagues to meet with regularly about the issue of teaching reading to middle and high school students, because a lot of us at the middle and high school level, that is not the training we got in our graduate school programs. And we were not taught how to teach reading. We were taught how to instruct around content. And those are two different things. The how to teach reading piece, it may be that we ourselves as teachers have to do some work on that this fall. It might be a professional study group. It might be to actually, my colleague Ernest Morel and I, in writing Every Child a Super Reader, recognize that many 6th through 12th grade teachers actually find that book incredibly helpful because it is all about a strength-based approach. So take a professional book or some professional authors and actually ask the question, invite the question, if I were to see myself more as a teacher of reading, what kind of ways do I have to shift my instructional perspective? So it's not all just about shoveling the content, which I know we love to do. And believe me, I love to do that too. My own daughters would tell you that. And my husband too. We love to talk about history. We love to talk about science. My husband loves to talk about math facts. All the ways you need to be a reader in the world. We're like, hey, we need for you to know this content, right? But we need to step back on that and say, what do we need to do to fortify ourselves to know what the pitfalls are? So if we need to know more about teaching phonics or teaching comprehension strategies or knowing more about how to unpack the roots of a word, then we're going to need to be learners ourselves as we go back into the year. And let's embrace it. Ask principals for time. Ask your principals to treat you all to lunch and to make some lunchtime book chats about teaching reading at middle and high school, because I think it's on us too. And then the third thing is, let's make sure that our classroom libraries are rich with diverse texts, both in terms of levels and also in terms of the voices and perspectives that we're hearing in those books. Because our students now, they've had a whole year of immersing in social media. They need to see books and texts that reflect their lives, the lives of their friends, the diverse perspectives out in the world, not to be afraid, because 6th through 12th graders have a lot of opinions. And we want to make sure that the books in the classrooms reflect a lot of different points of view so they can have lively discussion. If it's just you read this so that you can answer my questions that I already know the answers to, it's not that interesting for them. So we have to really keep it lively.
So we have to have good text. We need to have those teacher reading group meetings. I mean, that is just so important. And you're absolutely right. It's not in the training that a lot of 6 through 12 teachers, because I'm in that category. And then begin with their strengths. Okay, so we've got these 3 things. Let's go to the first day of school. First day of school, kids walk in the room and I realized, I'll tell you, one time I was teaching adults and I had told an adult to go and click in a certain place and with a certain word. And I realized the adult couldn't read. It completely changed my instruction, even for the technology, because she couldn't read the word submit. So I had to change, this is the color, this is whatever. So kids come in, first of all, what's a good way to kind of understand without putting kids on the defensive, where is this student in terms of reading? How do we do it? Because, a lot of times teachers will have them read and then answer a worksheet, which is just a terrible way to understand what they comprehend. Where do we start with that?
Well, I think in terms of the classroom, because I know that the district or the school, at the school and district level, there will be decisions made. Hopefully there will be teacher voices in those decisions, but where there's some kind of structure in place for pre and post assessments. And I think that's something that is a decision that should be made in a committee and in a group that makes those intentional decisions. But I think in the classroom, that first day when your students come in, it's really important that we actually tap into not only what their reading levels are, but actually what is their reading thermometer? What's their temperature? In other words, what's their temperature for reading? And there are a few really interesting things that we can do with that. One is, in order to establish what I described earlier as a community of belonging, we have to be immediately set the stage for norms around talking about reading and when reading feels hard, rather than you're immediately isolating certain kids because they didn't actually read a novel over the summer at all. We want to make sure they feel included and part of the work. And so immediately, in terms of that first day, one conversation we can have is to have every student in our class create a reading portrait. And in that reading portrait, we want to invite them and actually model for them that in our portrait is going to be when reading felt hard, as well as a moment when reading felt good. Now, I would like to invite teachers to model for their students the reality of your own reading life. So in my reading portrait, I'm going to put in there something about how much I love to read about the royal family, for example. It's a funny thing. My daughters and I love to read about the royal family. We love to see Prince William going to nursery school and, Meghan and Harry with their chicken coop and all of that. And it's silly and fun and nice. And it's a wonderful way that we bond, right? So I put that in my portrait. I also put into my portrait reading that's felt hard for me. Like I talked to my students about a book that I did try to read this summer. And it was a book that had been recommended to me by a good friend whom I admire. And I wanted to read the way she reads. And it was just too hard and I had to put it down. And I put that in my reading portrait. The other thing I put into my reading portrait is something that actually really makes me feel good, like recipes. So we did a lot of cooking during these months of COVID, and my Aunt Rita has this very famous marble cake recipe, and it's in this like sort of tattered piece of index card. And even reading that actually brings her back to me. And so I put that into my reading portrait. So I'm setting a stage to say to my students, I accept you because I accept myself. And then within that, I start to see my students adding to it. It doesn't even have to be completed in the first day. You could say, let's leave those out, give them a lot of art supplies to make them interesting, and leave them there for the week and say, every day we're going to take a few minutes to actually go back to our portrait. And I want you to be as authentic and yourself as possible. If you see that some of your students are saying, I don't really have that much here, except maybe my texting with my friend, that's a lot of information you actually have already. Unlike, a really avid reader like my niece, who is an avid reader and would into her reading portrait in 10th grade have put mysteries and poetry. And already you can see that rich abundance there. But in those reading portraits, I'm not judging anybody. I'm not saying, oh, you have less than my niece has more. I'm saying I'm the kind of reader who. And when we share, I want them to add to that prompt. I'm the kind of reader who loves reading about the royal family and usually finds that information in People magazine. Or I'm the kind of reader who avoids reading thick books. Those are real things. And we will learn a lot about our students by creating reading portraits. And I encourage you to do that at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and the end of the year. So you can actually see the changes that happen across the year, that read aloud they fall in love with. All kinds of things. And then the other thing is, just to add on to that is, and this might be surprising to the 6th through 12th grade educators who obviously were looking for some good fixes for some of these very challenging and serious problems. I'm going to say something now that might seem surprising and also seem like, oh, that's too light and not important enough. But I'm going to say it is the read aloud is really important. It's unifying. It again goes back to that community of belonging. It creates a sense of wholeness in your class. It doesn't judge people. You can choose a poem. You could choose a novel. You could choose a short story. You could choose a very funny book. But the very first day of school, make time for a read aloud, saying to your students, nobody's ever too old for a read aloud. The read aloud is an ancient tradition. Every culture has some form of read alouds in their culture, and it's a really beautiful way to bring a community together. So every day we're going to have 10 minutes of that ritual. Also for your students to see you doing that, and that some of those books or texts that you choose aren't going to always be the hardest text. Sometimes it might even be a picture book. There are lots and lots of picture books that are actually meant for older students. There are people who write like Naomi Nye and Brian Collier and others who write for older students. And their picture books are paintings. They're beautiful, beautiful works of art. And you should talk like that to your students. This is art. And it's also, by the way, really hard to write a picture book. It's probably one of the hardest genres there is to write. And I'm often starting like that. I say, if you actually look at the craft of this author and how difficult that is to do, so that I'm leveling the playing field right off the bat. When my students, get into the week and I'm starting to understand that you'll see right away the red flags of resistance, students who say, I don't want to talk about this. Our work is to be beside them in the journey and to say, it's going to be a place here where we can feel like we're totally ourselves, where we can feel comfortable to be ourselves and to be fully who we are. And that message might need to be said many times in many ways. And I do believe if we skip that part because we're so worried about our kids not learning to read, they're not going to learn to read. So that's very important to me, is to create that community.
So we've really got 5 things that you've given us, but I want to back up and ask one clarifying question about the reading portrait. Is the reading portrait like on paper? Is it turned into a scrapbook? Is it like a Google Doc? Like, what is that reading portrait?
Well, everything you just said is a great way to do it. And I think I would say to the teachers listening, to educators listening, that I want you to feel comfortable with it too. I've seen teachers who really love art, or even just putting out art materials, give students big pieces of white canvas or just beautiful paper and make it really very much centered around the art experience as well, because it really opens our students up. Like sometimes you see, the images they are telling us about in their portrait are just that, I love to sit on my stoop and read, or I love to just lie out in the hammock if I have one. But plenty of our kids are going to be telling us different stories in those portraits. So it may be very artful, but I also have seen people do these on Google Docs. So everyone can fill in a Google Doc. You can share the link with your teacher. It's going to be more private and personal. You could do that as well with a share to come later in the week. And I forgot your third option, which was also good, but I can't remember what it was.
You could do it on a Google Doc or like have a HyperDoc or something in Google Slides and have the questions and they could do.
I love it.
So last question is this. Teachers come in, they realize, okay, this is something new. I have more students with, I love what you said, red flags of resistance. That is such a powerful term. I'm going to quote you in lots of areas with that. That's so great. So teachers obviously can get your book, Every Child a Super Reader. But are there communities of practice where teachers with particularly this grade level 6 through 12 who are working with those readers, they can go? Because, right now things are so new. It kind of feels like I need people who are doing this right now as a resource as well.
I mean, I think that, this challenge is happening everywhere, all across the country, all around the world. Our 6th through 12th graders are still learning to read. And I think the more we talk about it openly in our school, in our classrooms, the first community is our school community. And it might even be worthwhile to say, can we do a pop-up group, even to ask your principal, can we do a pop-up club that will meet just 3 times where we're going to talk about our older students where we're seeing those red flags of resistance? Can we actually have a pop-up group that meets just 3 times to talk about this? Because I actually think your best allies are right next door to you. They're having similar challenges. And how can we turn the corner with our students? It may be that as we see some of our students the resistance is coming because it's not low motivation. It's really insecurity, in a sense, a lack of confidence. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, what are we doing to build that confidence? That's where I talk about the read aloud and those communities of belonging and creating norms where nobody feels left out or isolated. But the other thing too is that there may be areas of skill-based strength building that we can actually create. So if I have fellow middle school teachers who are noticing, I have some kids here I'm really worried about, that we can actually create book club settings for them where we actually do push in more around skills and we do actually do a little bit more work on some of the basic fundamentals where they don't have to do that in front of all their classmates necessarily, but give them a little privacy and a little bit of dignity in that, make it sound really good, not as pull out, but more as book club.
Yeah.
So I think all of this is good. And I think we all need a community for this because, but our kids, kids can, when they feel that they're part of something, they will move faster than you ever might have imagined.
Right.
I created a program called Lit Camp, and it goes all the way through high school. It's a summer literacy program that districts buy and use for their districts. And at first people said to me, my middle and high school students aren't going to want Lit Camp. That seems like for kids, Well, let me tell you something. They love Lit Camp. And a lot of it is because there's a sense of inclusion and acceptance that gives them an opportunity to read a book like Captain Underpants in 9th grade. Like nobody's going to make fun of you. And that actually is a book you need to read in 9th grade. If that's your reading level, you need to read it. So that independent reading and independent reading level work, we have to do that with boldly, fearlessly, without embarrassment with our students.
Well, so many great ideas. Pam Allyn, we'll have all of her resources in there. And we're all in this together, aren't we, Pam?
Oh, we really are. And what a great topic to have for our conversation today. I think we're all worried. I think we carry that worry with us. But I want to just say to everybody, first of all, thank you for all the work that you do. And secondly, if we do it together, it is going to be easier. We can carry our students and they can carry us. So I hope we have a wonderful year.
Thank you so much, Pam, for your encouragement and for your advice.
Thank you.
In today's show, we learned how to help readers in grades 6 through 12. Today's sponsor, LitWorld, is an app to help students in grades 6 through 12 engage with reading. In this app, the books literally are broken into text message-sized chunks, making reading easier. Plus, LitWorld has classroom management features for teachers. So go to litworldapp.com, that's LITERAL app.com, and use the promo code COOLCAT to get a free educator account to try LitWorld in your classroom. If you have a classroom full of struggling readers, I highly recommend checking out the LitWorld app. That's litworldapp.com and use that promo code of COOLCAT to get a free educator account. Tweet me at CoolCatTeacher and let me know what you thought.
If you enjoyed today's 10-Minute Teacher podcast, why not subscribe on iTunes? You can also catch up with Vicki on Twitter at CoolCatTeacher or level up and learn with her blogs and free resources at CoolCatTeacher.com. Thanks for listening.